All right, so we've been keeping up with the ongoing fight surrounding the COVID-19 patents and the patent protections for a lot of these big pharmaceutical companies who have already profited billions and billions of dollars from these COVID vaccines so far. And still, because of people like Bill Gates, who we're going to be discussing today, because of people like Bill Gates, they are able to prioritize protecting these vaccine patents and therefore the profits of these big pharmaceutical companies at the expense of literally the entire rest of the world and our ability to potentially move past COVID. Because if we don't vaccinate the entire world, and we only vaccinate the populations in these developed nations like the United States and Europe, who are the ones enforcing this global vaccine apartheid, if we don't vaccinate the entire global population in a uniform way or in a coordinated way, then COVID is going to continue to spread in these other countries, and there will continue to be variants popping up, and eventually there will be variants that negate all of the progress that we have made on these vaccines. So it's extremely important that we vaccinate everybody as quickly and efficiently as possible. But Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, has something else to say about it. So let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say about relinquishing these vaccine patents, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the role he's played throughout this process.
And in terms of that, there's been some speculation that the changing intellectual property rules and allowing these vaccines, as you say, the recipe for these vaccines to be shared would be helpful. Do you think that would be helpful?
No.
Why not?
Well, there's only so many vaccine factories in the world, and people are very serious about the safety of vaccines. And so moving something that had never been done, moving a vaccine from, say, a J&J factory into a factory in India, that it's novel. It's only because of our grants and our expertise that can happen at all. The thing that's holding things back in this case is not intellectual property. There's not like some idle vaccine factory with regulatory approval that makes magically safe vaccines.
Okay, so let's go ahead and tackle that first claim, or the last claim that he made at the end there, that there are no idle vaccine production capable factories sitting around the world that haven't been able to produce because of these IP laws or because of these IP patent protections. So he's 100% wrong about this. So as pointed out here by Paris Marx, Bill Gates is lying in this interview. And as pointed out by the AP, this was from March 1st to 2021, so March 1st of this year. In an industrial neighborhood on the outskirts of Bangladesh's largest city lies a factory with gleaming new equipment imported from Germany. Its immaculate hallways lined with hermetically sealed rooms, and it is operating at just a quarter of its capacity. It is one of the 3 factories that the Associated Press found on 3 continents whose owners say they could start producing hundreds of millions of COVID-19 vaccines on short notice if only they had the blueprints and technical know-how. But that knowledge belongs to the large pharmaceutical companies who have produced the first 3 vaccines authorized by countries including Britain, the European Union, and the US, and those companies being Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. The factories are still awaiting responses. So, you're a fucking liar, Bill Gates. You are an absolute lying psychopath who is only caring about the profits of these large pharmaceutical companies at the expense of the rest of the developing world. So, you know, we've been talking about this for a long time, and it's really getting annoying that we still have to have these ongoing conversations. This is a matter of life and death for literally millions and millions of people potentially, because as we are pacing out right now, a lot of these countries are not going to see legitimate access to widespread COVID vaccines for potentially years by 2022 or late this year. And this is just going to cause the pandemic to continue. It's just going to prolong the amount of time that we have to think about and deal with COVID-19. We have an interconnected world. We have an interconnected economy. And I mean, I don't understand any argument whatsoever that you could possibly make to guard these vaccine patents over getting rid of COVID and trying to get access or trying to give access to these vaccines to as many people as possible in as efficient a way as possible. And as to his concerns about like the safety of these vaccine production capabilities or these vaccine factories, I mean, listen, it's really condescending, honestly, if I'm going to be real about it. I mean, what he's basically saying is these other countries just aren't as smart as us. They don't have the technical know-how, which to some degree is fair because there are a lot of countries like in Africa and Southeast Asia that simply don't have the production capabilities, but we clearly have examples where they do. And what Bill Gates is really saying here, a fair translation is, well, you're just not smart enough. We just can't trust you with our precious technology. And, you're just going to have to sit around and wait for our scraps once we're done vaccinating our own populations. I mean, that's what he's saying to these countries as they are suffering, as they literally thousands of people are dying in all these countries. And it's because they don't have the ability to produce it, as we see in this article here. I mean, they claim hundreds of millions of COVID vaccines on short notice. But even if they weren't able to do it on short notice, then the answer to the problem that he's saying, well, we don't have enough factories that are equipped with the necessary equipment or technology or know-how to be able to produce these safely and effectively, well, the answer to that would have been, from the beginning, let's start investing in some of these countries. Let's start giving them funding, giving them technical equipment so that they can build up that production capability so that everybody can have access to the vaccines and we can move past COVID as quickly and efficiently as possible. But that's not what the priority was. And let me read to you some of the origins of what Bill Gates was doing at the beginning of the pandemic in order to make sure that we resulted or ended up in the position that we are right now. So this is from an article that was written in the New Republic by Zajic, and he says, in April of 2020, Bill Gates launched a bold initiative or a bold bid to manage the world's scientific response to the pandemic. Gates' COVID-19 Act Accelerator expressed a status quo vision for organizing the research, development, manufacture, and distribution of treatments and vaccines. Like other Gates-funded institutions in the public health arena, the accelerator was a public-private partnership based on charity and industry enticements. Crucially, and in contrast to the CTAP, the accelerator enshrined Gates's long-standing commitments to respecting inclusive intellectual property claims and its implicit arguments that intellectual property rights won't present problems for meeting global demand or ensuring equitable access. That's obviously been a problem. So he was 100% wrong about this, and that they must be protected even during a pandemic, carried the enormous weight of Gates's reputation as a wise, beneficent, and prophetic leader. So it's just amazing how Bill Gates has been able to convince people that he is some benevolent, prophetic leader, as they're saying in this. This is a guy, okay, who years ago, and this clip is often brought up to prove that Bill Gates is some sort of secret genius. And there were years ago where Bill Gates would give speeches and he would say in the next coming years or decades, there could be something like a pandemic that is widespread and airborne. And he kind of low-key predicted COVID, even though it was already a pretty predictable thing given what we're doing around our world, how all of our food production works, and all of these other things that would result in the likelihood that we would have a pandemic eventually. But it's often, they use these clips of him predicting the pandemic, and then they leave out this type of shit, right? So they portray him as if he's some sort of prophet. So, we should just let him do whatever he wants and let him be the de facto health czar of the world, even though he's a fucking billionaire whose only goal is clearly to profit off of the pandemic, and he has profited off of the pandemic. And you clearly see where he's wrong. His claim from the beginning with this program that he was putting forward was that it would not affect the ability for some of these other countries to get equitable access to the vaccines in an efficient way. It clearly has failed in doing that. That is undisputable. But they continue saying how he's developed and wielded this influence over 2 decades is one of the more consequential and underappreciated shapers of the failed global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Entering year 2, this response has been defined by a zero-sum vaccination battle that has left much of the world on the losing side. So what happened was a lot of these wealthier countries started early bidding on some of these vaccines and dumped ridiculous amounts of money in order to secure hundreds of millions of shots for their own populations. And these bilateral agreements between private companies and these countries, these wealthy countries, resulted in that access, the restriction of that access to all of these other countries that couldn't afford to make that upfront payment at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is a problem. I mean, this is a serious problem that we obviously can't ignore. You can't just not vaccinate entire continents of people and expect to be able to move to some sort of a post-COVID world. But they continue, and this is a good way of thinking about it. So quoted in the piece is James Love, the founder and director of Knowledge Ecology International, which studies public policy and intellectual property as it intersects with public health and the drug industry. Love explains just how powerful the influence of the Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been in curtailing the conversation. So he says, if you said to an ordinary person, we're in a pandemic, let's figure out everyone who can make vaccines and give them everything they need to get online as fast as possible, it would be a no-brainer, right? Let's solve the pandemic as quickly and efficiently as possible as a global community, right? It's a global pandemic. We got to solve it as a global community. But Love told TNR, but Gates won't go there. Neither will the people dependent on his funding. He has immense power. He can get you fired from a UN job, which is absolutely disturbing. And he knows that if you want to work in global public health, you'd better not make an enemy of the Gates Foundation by questioning its positions on IP and monopolies. And there are a lot of advantages to being on his team. It's a sweet, comfortable ride for a lot of people. So you see where the pressures and the incentives are in this. I mean, Bill Gates obviously over the years has developed this power, this influence over global public health with his investments and his ownership of a lot of the people that are involved in this process. And like they said, I mean, for a lot of people in this, it's just a sweet, comfortable ride and you're coasting along with a billionaire and it seems like a sweet deal. But the consequences of this are obvious. I mean, we have entire continents that basically won't have serious access to the vaccines for potentially years or at least many, many months in the future. And even then, it's like you're asking them to just wait, let their people die, and wait for the scraps that come from these wealthy countries. And the entire thing that he's doing here is protecting the profits of these big pharmaceutical companies, which, by the way, received massive upfront funding, public funding from the United States in a lot of the cases of the underlying technology in these vaccine patents or in these vaccines, along with a lot of other public funding from other countries around the world. So these were largely publicly funded vaccines that then the profits behind them and the distribution behind them has been privatized by these companies. And they've already made tens of billions of dollars over the pandemic from these vaccines. I mean, I can't remember which one, but one of these vaccines is actually literally the most profitable medicine in history. It's the most profitable vaccine in history. Think about that. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and these people are concerned about making billions of dollars for big pharmaceutical executives while people are fucking dying. I mean, this is genocidal. I mean, I don't know how else to describe this situation other than this is mass murder for corporate profits, for big pharmaceutical profits. And it's people like Bill Gates that are getting in the way. It's people like Bill Gates that have somehow flown under the radar from criticism, largely at least, throughout this entire conversation. And this is what we need to be focusing on right now. If you care about moving to a post-COVID society, they have to get rid of these vaccine patents. Okay, they have to give all of this information to all these other vaccine-producing capable factories around the world and give the information to all of these other countries around the world so that we can get this vaccine production and distribution ramped up so that we can actually move to a post-COVID society. The way that we're doing it right now is pathetic and it's not going to work long-term. And it's really just despicable. I mean, again, there's no better way to describe this other than it's mass murder for big pharmaceutical profits, and it's people like Joe Biden, it's people like Bill Gates who have the power to actually step in and do something good, and they're choosing not to. So you know what, don't ever tell me that there's such a thing as a good billionaire. I know Bill Gates has managed to convince a lot of people that he is some benevolent person. He's not. He's just as evil as the rest of them. There's no such thing as a good billionaire, and Joe Biden needs to absolutely step in or he's going to be complicit and have blood on his hands.